Hey folks, hopefully you saw my recent review / movie on the X2D100C. We put it through a whole bunch of different tests, but being such a long video, I'm not sure that everybody caught all the different points in there. And I wanted to talk specifically about the in-body image stabilization of this camera. Now, basically, Hasselblad hasn't brought out a camera with in-body image stabilization before, so it would be fair to assume their first one out of the gate may be middle of the pack or just so-so in terms of performance, but it's actually kind of astounding. This is a 102 megapixel camera. You would think that even if the stabilization is good, there's going to be a hard and fast limit to how slow you can hold it for handheld shots. But it's performing way beyond what I would even consider shooting on like a 50 megapixel stabilized mirrorless camera like my Z9 that I'm currently filming on. So I thought, let's head out and actually do a few different handheld tests and show you the kind of results I'm taking a look at these street shots. The first one here at a 1/13 of a second, focused on the buildings in the background, you can see are perfectly pin sharp. The next one at a full second, you can kind of see the guy behind the double-decker bus that drove through. Again, amazingly, I would say 90% sharp. It could be, however, that it was at f32 in the middle of the day. And then this one at 0.07 of a second, also perfectly sharp. And here, not that slow of a shutter speed, but you can see having a moving subject, you're able to get good blur on the areas that you wanted, that tells a story, and still have the background nice and sharp. Next up, let's head up to the Peak in Hong Kong, a famous lookout on Lagarde Road. We included this in the main test, but I wanted to show you some of the landscape shots that we got here, slow and handheld. Okay, taking a look at these shots, keeping in mind this was at the end of a long day of shooting and I'm getting old, so probably not as stable as I could be. This first shot here at half a second, you can see up here on the right. Looking at the building, it's just crisp, it's sharp, and there's no question that's a sharp shot. The boat in the background where it was slightly moving started to blur out, but it just works. For a 102 megapixel camera, it kind of blows my mind. This next one at a full second of exposure, again focused on this most famous building in Hong Kong, and it's, what can you say, it looks great. Let's go into 200%. And yeah, there doesn't seem to be any movement or warping in it. 1 second at 102 megapixel. And then this shot, final one, 2 seconds at night is already, I think, crazy enough. 100%. I would say this is probably 90% sharp, to be honest. It just feels more hazy. I'm not seeing that there's movement blur in there. It just overall looks, yeah, hazy. I'm not really sure why that would be, but looking at the points, it does pretty much still look sharp to me. There you go. Let's head out on the street and shoot some geometric lines with Felicia. We did a bunch of different portraits this day, a lot of them down at slow shutter speeds as well, with some pretty incredibly sharp results given hand holding at slow shutter speeds. Now, one point I wanted to point out for you as well, in case you are an owner of this camera, this can't detect if you're on a tripod, and Hasselblad do still recommend that you turn off the in-body image stabilization if you're shooting on a tripod, because it can actually degrade image quality. There's lots of little quirks like that one and some that are a little bit more unique to the X2D. If you are using this camera, then please do check out my new expert setup guide. It runs you through all of the physical controls, the initial setup you want to make to get the most out of the camera. It runs you through the entire menu system, showing you what every different option does, a cheat sheet you can take out into the field, and practical in-studio tips about using this camera. Links for that are below. Now let's head out in the field. So we've come out to do a bunch of different tests with the X2D. For stabilization, however, if I'm going to try and do half a second or a full second,
maybe me and the camera can achieve it, but a subject is likely to move a little bit and the sensor can't take that into account. So we need to find something super boring like some signs or some walls that have a good texture or something that you can clearly pull out to see if it's nice and sharp or not, and use that as our focus point. So let's find something vaguely interesting to stand still and shoot. Okay, so this isn't the most fascinating, but there's some interesting lines here and construction in the background. And it's nice and dark, so this will be easy to get some longer exposure times here.
So look, it's not the most interesting shot, but it is a good one with lots of contrast to be able to see if we're really getting it nice and crisp. So I shot a whole bunch of different shots at different shutter speeds. Let's take a look. This first one at 1/125th of a second, and you can see perfectly sharp. Now I'm only choosing out the sharp ones just to give you an example. There were some miss ones at slower shutter speeds, but I'll tell you about that in a second. This one at 1/10 of a second, still sharp. 1/4 of a second, razor sharp. 1/2 a second, it's still fine. Now around here I need to give a disclaimer. 1 second, you can see it's 80-90% sharp. This one at a second is sharp. And I think we got one a little slower than that. 1.6 of a second, 90% sharp. But again, we were there at f/18, so diffraction may be playing a role in it.
You know the technique for getting a long exposure? Do you mind to try it?
Okay.
If it doesn't work, we don't have to include it, or if you don't feel good. But because you're not using a tripod, 2 hands, and then you actually want to push it hard against your head. So you're kind of using your head as the 3rd point. So you have 3 legs of a tripod, so we've got 1, 2, 3. So your body is trying to hold it from moving backward and forward. Your hands are pushing it to your head, and they're stopping it from going left and right as well. So you can just put the focus point onto like this beam, and then if you just hold the button down, it'll take multiple shots and see what you're able to get. Much easier to, I know it maybe feel uncomfortable, but put it nice and firm on your head. So Felicia just did another series there at 1/2 a second, sharp. This isn't just about inane tests that YouTubers do that have no real practical application. Imagine going on a holiday with your boyfriend. You don't want to take a tripod and everything, but you want to go to Tokyo and get all the people walking through the crossing and get them blurred out, or shoot a river with some movement in it. 1 second really gets you into interesting territory to be able to shoot that without having hand movement in the shot. Cool. So you can see Felicia didn't try any quite as long as a second or a second and a half, but she was still getting some decent results considering she hasn't had much experience hand holding these kind of exposure times. Now I have to give a disclaimer though, it's not like I'm getting 100% of them. I would say up to 1/4 of a second, pretty much 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10 with good technique, I'm getting sharp if there's no movement in the subject. By 1/2 a second, maybe that drops to like 5 or 6 out of 10. By a full second, 4 or 5 out of 10. It's not 100% strike rate. And going past that up to 1.5 and 2 seconds, you might be taking 10 shots and getting 2 or 3 that are perfectly sharp. To be honest, I just wouldn't expect that even from a Canon, Sony, or Nikon mirrorless camera with 50 megapixels, let alone something that has more than double that. Now you'll note if we're going into the menu on the X2D and we have a look at stabilization, it can automatically detect the XCD series lenses. If, however, you're adapting a lens, and I'm going to do more with adapted lenses soon to demonstrate on this camera, you're actually going to need to do an extra step. So, switching the lens over here to one of my old favorite portrait lenses, the 105 f2.5 Nikon lens. Now we go back into that stabilization menu. And you'll see it has actually come up as 105mm because I had set it up previously. But depending on what lens you're using, you want to go in there
and dial in specifically the focal length of the lens you're using. The way the IBIS works, depending on if you're using a 24mm or a 50 or a 105 or a 200mm lens, is going to be different. And as you've seen, the stabilization you can get with this with a little bit of practice is pretty phenomenal. So to be able to translate that to all of your adapted lenses is really fantastic. Let me know any questions you've got and any other tests you'd like to see. I have this camera in for a little while thanks to Panda Camera here in Hong Kong. I'll have links to them in the description below as well. Cheers, and I'll see you soon.